I'll share it.
Okay, thank you.
Ok. Jorge, ya estamos listos, ¿verdad? Ok. Bien. Pues buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Es un gusto estar compartiendo con ustedes una nueva conferencia. Estoy muy contenta de tener a nuestros invitados el día de hoy. Seguimos con el ciclo de conferencias Liberalismo y Proteccionismo, dos caras en las relaciones en Asia-Pacífico. Quien tenemos como invitada especial a la doctora Carol Weiss de la Universidad de Southern California. Welcome, Carol Weiss. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Y bueno, pues también agradezco la presencia de Miguel Híjar, también del doctor Ernesto Turner, de nuestros estudiantes y de todo el público que nos está acompañando el día de hoy. Realmente es una muy buena plática la que se tendrá, Relaciones China-América Latina, Política con características chinas. Qué gusto tenerlos el día de hoy y pues le doy la palabra a Ernesto Turner.
Bueno, pues también agradecerle mucho a la doctora Delfín, ¿verdad? Que nos ha acompañado, ¿verdad? Y bueno, que está aquí organizando el seminario. Ya llevamos varias pláticas, esta es la cuarta, ¿verdad? Y entonces tenemos la suerte, pues, de que ahora nos acompaña la doctora Carol Weiss, ¿verdad? Y que Miguel Híjar va a ser nuestro moderador, ¿verdad? Y entonces, bueno, por las relaciones que existen entre China y los Estados Unidos, ¿verdad? Pues siempre oír una opinión calificada, ¿verdad? En la coyuntura actual sobre China y Estados Unidos, pues va a resultar algo muy interesante, algo también desafiante y que seguramente nos va a mantener a todos con interés y preguntas y con ganas de profundizar sobre la temática, ¿verdad? Pues bueno, le agradecemos mucho nuevamente la visita a los que tenemos aquí y en redes, ¿verdad? A las personas que nos escuchan. Y bueno, ya sin más palabras, le daríamos la palabra al doctor Miguel Híjar Chapa, que va a ser nuestro moderador del día de hoy, ¿verdad? Para que él haga la presentación de la doctora Carol Weiss y del tema, para proceder pues ya propiamente a la conferencia. Muchísimas gracias, doctora Carol Weiss, por estarnos acompañando ahora. Estamos muy agradecidos, ¿verdad? Y eso es un placer tenerla con nosotros.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the University of Guadalajara. I've been there many times. I met Miguel there 8 years ago when he was first a professor there, and I recruited him to our doctoral program at USC. And in working with him and Arturo Santa Cruz and a number of others, I'm very fond of the university, and I'm so happy to be a speaker in this session. Now, I realize I only have 1 hour, and I have a long PowerPoint. So I'm assuming a fairly okay, not a high level, but a fairly, at least a moderate level of knowledge about China, Latin America, because I know you have a whole Pacific program there, and I've spoken in it before, and people were very knowledgeable. So what I'm going to do now, Mickey, are you going to run the PowerPoint or am I?
Yes, but let me introduce you first to the audience.
He gave me the palabra.
So, antes de comenzar con la charla de la doctora Weiss, permítanme presentarla. Agradezco, por supuesto, al doctor Turner y a la doctora Delfín por la invitación a moderar esta sesión y, por supuesto, a toda la red de centros de estudios APEC, que incluye a muchas de nuestras grandes universidades en México dedicadas al estudio de la cuenca del Pacífico. Bueno, pues la profesora Carol Weiss es profesora de Relaciones Internacionales y Ciencia Política en la Universidad del Sur de California. Ella, antes de llegar aquí a la USC, fue profesora en la Universidad Johns Hopkins, en la Escuela de Estudios Internacionales Avanzados en Washington, D.C. Y la profesora Wise tiene una licenciatura en Sociología por la Universidad de California, Santa Bárbara, una maestría en Administración Pública por la Universidad de Columbia, una maestría en Ciencia Política también por la Universidad de Columbia y, por supuesto, su doctorado en Ciencia Política por la misma Universidad de Columbia. Sus áreas de especialidad son principalmente la economía política internacional, la economía política internacional del desarrollo, con un énfasis particularmente en América Latina y la cuenca del Pacífico, las relaciones, por supuesto, entre Asia Pacífico y América Latina, con especial atención a la relación con China. En tiempos recientes también ha empezado proyectos que tienen que ver con la relación de China con el este de Europa y una comparación justamente de cómo es la relación de China con estas dos regiones, Europa Oriental y América Latina. Algunas de sus obras, pues obviamente abordan estos temas y pues su más reciente libro es justamente la cristalización de uno de estos proyectos, Dragonomics, How Latin America is Maximizing or Missing Out on China's International Development Strategy, que también tiene una versión en español, así que una obra recomendada para quienes estén interesados en estos temas. Entonces, pues ahora sí, le damos la palabra a mi queridísima Carol Wise, que nos hablará de la relación de China-América Latina y esta política con características chinas.
Ready?
Ready.
Thank you so much. Now, you're going to work the PowerPoint, Mickey? Okay, fantastic. We can pull it up. Now, having worked in Latin America for 30 years as a researcher and a scholar, and having written this book on China, Latin America, one of the big questions that I tend to get from media, from audiences, if I give a talk, one of the big questions is the political effects or the political impacts of Chinese relations with Latin American countries. And, you know, kind of the hidden pretext for many of these questions, it would be that, oh, is China exporting a kind of model of, you know, what do they call it now? Autocratic governance or authoritarianism to Latin America, to Latin American countries. And I would say the answer to that is no, because Latin America doesn't really need any help from China being autocratic. I mean, some countries are very autocratic right now. Others are struggling, but most of them, minus Venezuela and Cuba, do qualify as nominal democracies. So politics with Chinese characteristics, I'm referring to a trend that began right when China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001. And that was approaching many regions, but especially the Latin American region, as a business relationship, right? And so obviously there are politics in the relationship, but they've been acted out within the confines of public diplomacy on the Chinese side. And I have to really insist that the Chinese have articulated a foreign policy toward the region. They just finished the fourth major summit between the Latin American countries and China in Beijing. Working papers, all kinds of initiatives where the Chinese have officially stated their foreign policy toward Latin America in ways that are certainly developmental projects, that kind of thing. There have been some issues with the Confucius Institutes, but basically, you know, or they infusing all kinds of, you know, dogma or something, maybe. But the big picture is, I think, a very favorable picture. And I'm sitting in Los Angeles talking to you right now, where the streets are on fire, right? For reasons I think you all know. And we can talk about that a little bit at the end. But I want to say also that this is a very good moment for Latin America to bond more closely with China. China has the resources, it has the initiative, and it has the commitment to what we would call a modern foreign policy and diplomatic engagement with countries in Latin America. Slide, Mickey. So in this talk, another slide. Go ahead. So in this talk, I didn't realize I only had an hour, and I will leave time for some questions if you want me to. But let me just say that what I've done here is we're going to look at China's institutional outreach very quickly, and then we're going to look. It's unavoidable to talk about Chinese political approaches to Latin America without comparing them to US political approaches to Latin America. I'm not going to say anything too negative about the US because I'm traveling outside of the country, and they probably won't let me back in if I say anything negative right now. So take that, US State Department. I'm not going to say anything negative, or try not to, right? So as I began, the initiative started slightly before China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. So the first thing is, I'm just going to run down this, you can see it, but establishing a Caribbean Development Bank, joining the Inter-American Development Bank, joining the Organization of American States. And by the way, Japan also belongs to the Inter-American Development Bank, and I think Korea does too. Establishing a 1.8 billion Latin American fund for equity investments. And again, all kinds of regional finance platforms for countries to tap into. One of the most important ones is this 35 billion for industrial cooperation. So they're putting up some real money, and they're putting up, if you will, really constructed venues and conditions for accessing that money. Next slide. So I mentioned the white papers. When China first produced its white paper on Latin America in 2008, I was a scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., which is now gone, defunct. But I remember seeing somebody in the hallway, a Chinese scholar, and I said, what is this? What's going on, right? Because to me, in 2008, this notion of China, Latin America was really foreign. And of course, the 2008 white paper, you have to take white papers with a grain of salt, right? But the US State Department has not really been publishing any kinds of, if you will, the equivalent of white papers or foreign policy initiatives that could build bridges and unite countries, actors, politicians, builders, etc., unite people across borders. And China's been very, very serious about that. As I said, it's had 4 major ministerial meetings, and the last one just was last month in Beijing. Now, take ministerial meetings as they are, big summits and these kinds of things, but there have been results from these. The first was 2015. China says it's going to double its trade to 500 billion with Latin America, both ways, going back and forth by this year. I don't know if they made that goal, but I think they came close to it. They've got investment targets, and they have the declaration of, if you will, the Belt and Road Initiative, the infrastructure initiative, and inviting Latin American countries to participate. I think right now, 20 of the Latin American countries have signed up for Belt and Road. Belt and Road was slowed. It started in 2013. COVID really hit it hard. And if you will, capital flows for these kinds of projects were huge from China to Latin America, and they've slowed a lot since COVID. But if you will, the commitment is there, the sentiment is there, and the demonstration of some kind of diplomatic commitment to interact constructively. Go ahead, Mickey. China's response to COVID. This is ironic because China responded much better than, if you will, the developed countries to COVID in Latin America. But to this day, I mean, they sent vaccines, they sent all of the protective equipment and whatnot. But to this day, opinion polls in the region are still really negative about China and COVID, because most of the respondents see China and the province of Wuhan as the originator of COVID, and they haven't been able to get over that, right? But the US did very little for Latin America during COVID, and we had a lot of excess resources. So China was in there doing its bit. Go ahead, Mickey. Okay, so let's go to the triangle, one more. Let's go to the US Latin triangle. Now, I'm not going to belabor this, but it's well known that the relationship between between Latin America and the United States has been, it's been very conflictual and difficult. There are some good examples, but for the most part, what we saw was at the beginning of the post-Cold War, the post-World War II era, instead of bonding more with Latin America, as the U.S. did during World War I and World War II, security partnerships, commodity agreements, investments, and this sort of thing, instead of deepening that after World War II, Latin America, unfortunately, became a pawn in the Cold War, right? And so rather than investing in Latin America, as the U.S. did in Japan, Korea, Europe. That was, the very first fight against the so-called Soviet threat. They felt the Western Hemisphere was, their territory, and they could protect it without a lot of investment. But Latin America suffered greatly due to being, caught in between U.S. visions of Cold War threat and communist threat and the reality. The reality is, yes, Salvador Allende was elected on a Marxist socialist ticket in 1970, but a lot of the others that were elected in the post-war period, it was what we would call social democrat, all right, reformers. They weren't, if you will, avid leftists or anything, but the U.S. saw a communist at every corner. And this went all the way up through the Central American presence of the US with the Contras and whatnot. So it's been a dicey, as we say, it's been a difficult relationship. But there's always a chance to turn it around. Always. I am not a pessimist. I don't believe in structural determinism. I believe that a more cohesive policy, even now could help, but that's far-fetched. Okay, Mickey, go ahead. Okay, so this is in my book. This is in the PowerPoint, which I'll leave with all of you. But these are some of the efforts over time that didn't really succeed. The Alliance for Progress, unfortunately, Kennedy was assassinated, and that kind of, wound down. I think the Obama administration made some efforts to get away from this Monroe Doctrine. They repudiated it and said, it's imperialist. We're not operating according to that anymore. Go ahead, Mickey. So things as of 2016, 2017, with the first Trump administration, they began to deteriorate further. And there was some hope that perhaps the 21st century could be a century of, Latin American, U.S. Constructive engagement along the lines with China, like projects, investments, initiatives, and that has been even further from what's happened. So the Trump people come in, they're inaugurated early 2017, and immediately they reinstate the Monroe Doctrine, which is ridiculous, right? It's from 100 years ago, quite frankly. Okay, then the Biden administration came in and tried to host this, what they call the 9th Summit of the Americas. Those were started by Bill Clinton and Al Gore back in 1994, the Summit of the Americas. And the idea was that it's going to be one big, free trade agreement of the whole region. And we're going to move ahead along the lines of what I've been talking about, but probably not nearly as generous as the kinds of conditions and investments that China has put forward. Some of us being here in Los Angeles, this ninth summit was in Los Angeles. I went to it. It was anemic. Many countries boycotted it: Brazil, Chile, Mexico, because of the insistence of excluding Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. They had never been excluded in any of the summits that had happened previously. So Cuba was excluded, not the other two. So, and then under Obama and under Biden, the appointment of U.S. ambassadors in Latin America really went slowly. And it's not because of opposition in the Congress, it's because it wasn't a priority. Go ahead, Mickey. So the second Trump term, this is where you have to be careful. I'm just going to list, and it's the list is getting long, right? And what these are affronts. They are things that, really slap, policymakers, citizens, countries in the region. I mean, so the first was to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. The second, and I'll just, there's no kind of, they're all happening at once, unfortunately. The visa restrictions. And what we have seen is, I'm sure you've read about this, we have seen the arrest of massive numbers of so-called, undocumented aliens, as they call them, or illegal aliens, and just in mass, whereas some of them have visas, some of them have green cards, right? And so this is why people are out on the streets all over the country right now in major cities. It is the blanket arrests. They've set a target of 3,000 a day, which is, what about the quality? I mean, what about the actual case by case of these people? Again, some of them have the right to be here. The Venezuelans, the Ukrainians are getting arrested, and they all have what you would call temporary a residency status due to very difficult conditions in their home countries. Go ahead, Mickey. Okay, so the tariffs. I know Mexico has experienced firsthand these tariffs. And what's different now about these huge tariffs that came down on so-called Liberation Day on April 1, Trump called it that. But what's weird about these is that the US, for the first time since I have been a political scientist, is going after its allies. And Mexico and Canada, not only are we in a free trade agreement with, the three countries since 1994, it's been updated to something else. These are allies. These are close friends. The President of the United States, no, it's not the President, it's the Secretary of State of the United States, traditionally makes the first visit to Ottawa to meet the Canadian Foreign Secretary, and then to Mexico City. That is the way we have been conducting diplomatic relations for 50, 60 years. So go ahead, Mickey. Then there's these so-called retaliatory tariffs. I think your president has handled this very well, because the thing about it is just get out of the line of fire and try not to really, it isn't clear what stirs up the White House over these tariffs, but the president gets up on the wrong side of bed and boom, 50% tariffs on aluminum and steel. And this is a hardship not only for producers in your country, it's a hardship for the importers in the US who have to pay the tariffs, and then they shift the price increase off on consumers. The aluminum and steel tariffs that were instigated a week ago are going to cost, over this next year, they're going to cost about $100 billion in the US related to payments and then price hikes and whatnot, paying the tariffs. So that's bad, but it's worse for exporting countries who have by far higher quality and much better both aluminum and steel. The US, that's a sunset industry. It hasn't been invested in. It hasn't been upgraded. Steel from Poland, Brazil, Mexico is considered to be much superior. Go ahead. Okay, now this deportation through third countries, and this is still being litigated, right? It's being worked out in the courts because a lot of, we have different levels of judges. So one superior court judge, which is high, put a stop to this. And the really unfortunate thing here, the deportation through third countries, the really unfortunate thing here is that it's being litigated, it's being investigated, but it hasn't stopped. So we have a political administration that is not adhering to orders from both the Supreme Court, it's gone up to the Supreme Court and to the superior courts. This is a problem. So rule of law is really under threat. And, for years, the Washington consensus and whatnot was, really pushing countries in Latin America, like, oh, rule of law, property rights, right? Transparency. All of that is out the window right now with regard to the behavior of the administration in Washington. And deportation through third countries. Let me ask you, why does, for example, a Venezuelan undocumented individual in the United States, why do they have to be shipped to South Sudan or to Guantanamo? What about just shipping them back to their home country, which is the common strategy and policy up until now? So we have this added element of cruelty. The cruelty, the humiliation, the punishment, and insisting everybody is part of the Tren de Agua or the M13 or whatever it is in El Salvador. And then we could say, no, we couldn't say, let's take Bukele in El Salvador. So questions posed to me before this current administration would be, could we attribute his turn to authoritarianism, and he's very proud about that. Could we attribute that to engagement with China? No. Could we attribute that to engagement with the current administration in the United States? Yes, we could, right? He's been to the White House. He's been, the source of adulation, and he's got this very dangerous prison in El Salvador, where the U.S. is trying to arrange to pay him. They're already paying him something to take these people. But I ask you, why can't they just go home? There is no evidence, any evidence for most of these people being criminals, gang members, human traffickers, and this kind of thing. So now, if we want to compare China, U.S., if you will, gestures, relations, policies toward Latin America, this detention, shipping people to really dangerous third countries in places like Guantanamo, this is new. And it is, I think, it's a very dangerous path to go down. You want to talk about democracy, okay? I mean, the question, as I said, is, for years, was China eating away at democracy? No, I don't see it doing that. Basically, China really just wants to do business. That's political in a sense. Like, it's hard to do business without taking politics into account. But I don't see any of the kind of gestures, very, very negative, hostile gestures coming from China. Okay, Mickey. Now, points of U.S.-China rivalry. And by the way, the facts have been very thin, very thin. I was invited to Panama last summer. I saw the canal. I talked to the directors. It was a group of us that went to a conference, and we were taken to the canal as a tourist event almost. But this notion that China owns the Panama Canal is not true. They know it's not true, right? But it's these massive, huge exaggerations and, threatening Panama with an invasion, hello, United Nations, where are you, right? Threatening Panama with an invasion if they don't, quote, get the Chinese out of there. That's been very hostile. Mickey? Now, we just had a wonderful presentation on this Shanghai port at a lunch. Mickey was with me on some, with some Chinese scholars who came and some Peruvians that were there presenting on the Shanghai port. And the US has claimed that China did build it, they did, and that China dominates the whole thing. Well, that's not quite true. It's a port, and other vessels have, entry. All vessels have to pay a tariff to use ports, but they have entry and they have access to the port. It's a major opportunity. It's a deep water port, which are deep water ports are hard to find on this particular part of the Pacific in Latin America. So there's a deep water port in Peru. They want another deep water port in Mexico. We'll talk about that later. But these deep water ports are massive opportunities economically, productivity, technology. They're massive opportunities. And Peru, being, a pretty small state in the region, is, the host of this. And I think it's a great opportunity. The administration has tried to paint this as the worst thing, the most awful thing. I think it's a really big advance forward. Go ahead, Mickey. So the China Latin America side of this so-called triangle, go ahead. So I think about now 12 countries have what they call strategic partnerships with China. Now, okay, I wrote about these in several papers in my book. So, okay, what is a strategic partnership? It started in 1993 when Beijing declared Russia, the US, and Brazil as global powers, which is very ironic because Beijing was in no position at the time to declare anybody a global power. So these have a bit of, grandiosity, these strategic partnerships. However, it's like a business chamber, okay? The strategic partnership kind of is the venue within which negotiations over projects, negotiations over investments, and trade occur between China and country X. They're not ideological because, China doesn't like some of China was not really interested in engaging, for example, with Latin America under the whole period of military rule. First, China had its own problems, but second, they don't like high inflation. No Asian investors. They're very strict about a macroeconomically rational, setting. So, but now that most of the region has become democratic, and that doesn't matter to China, but what really matters is that they don't have to deal with, bad policymakers, which unfortunately was the outcome of a lot of these military governments, hyperinflation and whatnot, right? So the US has a history of intermittent military interventions all the way up through the 80s, okay? I mean, the Contras were there 5 years before the Berlin Wall fell down under the auspices of a communist threat. So, these intermittent, military inventions and all kinds of, geopolitical, concoctions. And I have to say, as a Latin Americanist, I'm other things, but at heart, I'm a Latin Americanist. The US has missed a lot of opportunities in Latin America, a lot of rich opportunities. I think there's a very rich opportunity to engage with Mexico right now on anything other. I mean, the tariffs has been the basis and what fentanyl or something, and what they call the illegal aliens coming across and all of that. There's so many other positive ways to engage with Mexico, and it makes me sad I'm not sure scholars are supposed to feel sad about their subject, but it makes me sad because I love Mexico. I've been going there for years, and this is really an opportunity, and it's not going to be seized by Washington. Okay, Mickey? Now, I think we all know about the trade dynamics and the investment. One thing I will say about Mexico is that the South American countries have a very big surplus trading with China because they are trading massive amounts of soybeans, iron ore, copper, fish meal. And the Mexico and the Central American countries tend to have a large trade deficit. Mexico's had a particularly large trade deficit with China. And I want to just say a couple things about that. That started in I would say the first deficit was 1989. And that's when Mexico did this pacto. And the pacto set the peso to the dollar very tightly. And then we went all the way from 1990 to 1994 with the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement with a heavily overvalued Mexican peso. So it was during this period when China was still really competitively devaluing. It's during this period that the deficit got going, all right? And then the entry of China into the World Trade Organization, that was another ratchet up in terms of a high Mexico trade deficit. And Mexico, I think, the thinking, especially in the 90s and maybe up until the last decade, was we've cast our vote with the North American market. You know, we've cast our vote with value chains in autos and text just popped up. We've cast our vote and we're going to stick it out and we're going to realize our gains through trading in the North American Free Trade Agreement. And now the US, Mexico, China, or Canada, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. Okay, fine. But by 2004, and again, post World Trade Organization entry, China was clobbering Mexico in the US market, all right, in the US market, and exporting goods, intermediate goods in autos and in electronics that were cheaper and pretty high quality. And there was a period where Mexico really took a major hit with regard to, being pushed out of its own market, of the North American market by Chinese competition. Again, right now is, I think, Mexico's not in an easy spot because, for example, the Chinese auto industry, electric vehicles, they're all over South America, and they're producing in the big Chinese EV company is producing in Brazil. They're all over South America. And BYD has storefronts, just an example of electric vehicle storefronts all over Mexico City and other parts of Mexico. So the actual production of electric vehicles in Mexico has become highly sensitive, highly political. And Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, told the electric vehicle companies, cool your jets, okay? Just stop. Don't push for anything because everybody is afraid that for some reason, Washington hasn't tuned in to these amazing electric vehicle, competitive vehicles from China. But once they do, and they will, it's going to be more cause for tariff increases and all other kinds of ways of really distorting, distorting markets in the region. But I will say that China and Mexico, they've had their differences over a number of things. This is a very good time, though, for all of Latin America, but especially the big ones, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. It's a really good time to be on good relations with China. I'm sorry to be, pessimistic, but I don't see the opportunity for a workable relationship with the U.S. at this moment in time, in this particular moment, because no interest has been shown on the part of Washington, and it's basically been quite hostile, not just to Mexico and Canada, but to everybody, to the European Union, to Japan, Korea. I mean, it's just negative, negative, negative. So, but I do think this is a very good time for countries to, in the region, to continue what they've been doing with, various initiatives around development projects and whatnot. I do think it's a good time. Go ahead. Next one. Foreign direct investment. So the U.S. makes a big thing about this. I mean, the U.S., if we include Mexico, U.S. investment in Latin America is now over $1 trillion annually. If we take Mexico out, it's still significant. And China's foreign direct investment hasn't really surpassed, say, $150 billion. So, I mean, this thing about, oh, they're crowding us out. Well, on trade, I would say that it's not crowding the U.S. out. It's the U.S. really failing to take advantage of a lot of rich opportunities. On investment, there's just no, there's no question that the U.S. is the dominant actor. So, if you want to talk about hegemony and you want to talk about, the declining role of the U.S. in the world economy, if they keep up with these policies, yes. However, I would say in Latin America, the U.S. is not really in decline at all. It's still, how do we measure power in international relations and politics? Money, right? Military might. Those are the two. And so in that sense, China is an actor. It's an important actor for many countries in the region, but it's certainly not usurping or displacing the U.S. anywhere. Okay, Brazil, Peru, Chile have a higher levels of trade with Brazil than the U.S. does. It's all commodities. It's all commodities. Okay, let's go, Mickey. I think I'm looking at the time. Next one. All right, I'm not going to talk about Belt and Road. Quite frankly, that's been a little bit of much ado about nothing. Xi Jinping came to the summit in 2019. It was 2018. It was in Santiago, Chile, and randomly announced that Latin American countries are invited. Well, they're certainly not a natural part of the ancient Silk Road, and countries took it to heart. They signed memorandums of understanding with China about projects under Belt and Road. And interestingly, Belt and Road was launched in 2013. And I said it took a big hit during COVID, and it's slow to, to recuperate the level of lending. And also, we have a lot of other countries, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, that are in huge default. Montenegro, huge default of their infrastructure loans under Belt and Road. So there's been issues, right? But I think, the U.S. has really gone crazy about, Belt and Road to nowhere, and, bullying countries, trying to get them to not accept any Belt and Road funding. In fact, China has built the Belgrano Railroad in Argentina. It's a very important project to get goods across the country through a tunnel in the Andes to the Pacific port in Chile, the Chancay port, the modernization of the entire electric grid in Brazil, and on and on and on. And so what they've done is those weren't Belt and Road projects. They predated Belt and Road. So what China has done is just slap Belt and Road on everything that it's done, like big projects in Latin America. They've got a solar plant in northern Mexico. They put that under Belt and Road, and that is really much later. So Belt and Road, is it's a symbol. It represents what the U.S. thinks is the incursion of China in the region. In reality, it's not that much money. Go ahead, Mickey. Okay, go ahead. I'm just going to stop. Go ahead. Do I have something else? This is the last one. Final tally. Okay, let's see what I've got there. Economic gains and losses, need for reforms. So one thing that China's entry into the region has shown, it was very, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was shocked because when the commodity price boom ended, that was a 10-year commodity price boom. And again, China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 enabled China to just quickly ratchet up, to increase and go to the next level of industrial transformation. But a lot of that transformation required major commodities, right? So, and all the things that Latin America is so abundant in, especially iron ore, copper, etc. Okay, so that was a big, long, boom. It ended in 2014. And so countries like Brazil and Argentina, on the eve of the boom in 2003, were basket cases. It really was like, where do we go from here? It was bad, okay, both of them. And a number of other countries. So as soon as the boom ended in 2014, Argentina and Brazil fell into what's been a 10-year depression. It is not a recession. It is a depression. And so what does that show us? It shows us that, gee, when times are good, you can make a lot of money, but a lot of money distracted from the kinds of reforms that are really, really necessary. Just basic old-fashioned reforms around oversight, regulation, banking, fiscal policy. And so they're back where they started, quite frankly. 2003, it wasn't clear if Argentina, it was really a crisis. So they're back a little bit where they started. And that's disconcerting. And it just shows, it highlights just a long pattern of avoiding serious reforms. And there's nowhere to run or hide until you implement those reforms. I don't agree with all the reforms that Mexico was required to undertake in order to be admitted to the North American Free Trade Agreement. I did not like the immediate liberalization of financial services and the rest of the service sector. There are a number of things. However, Mexico has conducted or taken or implemented, a sufficient level of reforms to make it in this highly competitive era. There's more reform to do. There's always more reforms. Peru and Chile never just went on totally China all the way. They still had trade relationships with other countries in Asia, Europe, and the region. So there is still a major reform deficit in so many of the countries, and that's the kind of thing that isn't going to go away, and it's going to require. I listened to Lula in Brazil. Oh boy, talking about all the things he's accomplished. I beg to differ, right? There hasn't been a lot of reform, and Brazil, I could go on about that all day. Opening up the market, cleaning up a lot of the, just the transaction costs and all the uncertainties. Okay, let's go to the next one. Investment and growth. Okay, let's go again. I think that's it. Is that the end? So this is about reform in Latin America, and we can talk about that more. Go ahead. There we go. Okay, so I can see that there are some questions on the text. We have about 11 minutes according to my time, and Mickey, do you want to handle the questions? Because just you bring them up and I can answer them, or we can get a discussion going.
Yeah, we have here the first question by Prismac. Congratulations to the organizer and Carol Weiss. I would like to ask Carol, considering the rising of populism and protectionism worldwide, what are the chances that China can modernize its strategic relations with Latin American countries, and particularly Mexico?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think, it's been difficult, right? Because I think they've got the highest level of strategic partnership. It's something like, they call it non-fair weather friends forever, which means what, I love these things, right? So the highest level, but then I go to Mexico and it's got the highest level. And then, I talk to somebody in the China-Mexico, business chamber, and off the record, it's all a joke. And then I talk to somebody in Economia, it's like, this strategic partnership, and so they haven't taken it seriously. And I encourage Mexico to try to take this more seriously, even though there's tensions, all right? But I do think that China is showing, and it's trying very hard to show, that it may be ruthless, it may be super competitive and controlling, but it's not crazy, right? I mean, they're not throwing tariffs out. They're not throwing all kinds of crazy barriers up to integration and cooperation. And so I think right now for countries in the region, you have to really lean toward people that are still that are adhering to accepted economic models, accepted rules of the game, political courtesy, mutual respect, because it's like really wild in Washington. It's just, I don't know where these policies are coming from, and they're not very good, right? So I think Mexico has a real opportunity. It's difficult because China and Mexico, during COVID, when the markets came up again, they started trading more. And the intermediate goods, this is after the trade war started in 2018, right? So in 2018, there's these tariffs up in the auto sector and electronics, which are very destructive. And China was having trouble getting into the US market. And Mexico and China started trading more back and forth in intermediate goods. That's huge. That's gigantic. And it's very good for Mexico, right? So that happened as a result of the market, quite frankly, or distortions imposed in the market by the first trade war, the Trump people. So, I mean, Mexico canceled its industrial policy in 1992, right? Remember Sarah Puche, the best industrial policy is no industrial policy, right? Mr. Neoliberal, he comes to the IMF World Bank meeting in Washington. It's like, that's what you've got for us, buddy, right? But, it turns out that is not the best policy. And by canceling industrial policy, Mexico has thrown the intermediate goods sector basically on the market. And actually, with the beginning of the trade war, they showed that they could compete. But I would say that there has to be much more effort, if you will, to support the intermediate goods sector. Intermediate goods are things that, without them, you can't complete the final product. So I think more attention from the state, not subsidies, those are illegal under WTO, but more, if you will, kinds of encouragements, incentives, and whatnot for the industrial sector in Mexico, because they're facing China, which is, industrial policy, to the hilt. So I think there is a good chance. I'm saying, I think you have to find ways. I think there is. And I am impressed by many of your, people that are leading these, everybody looks good now outside of the US, but I think that many of the people who are in your government, I know who they are, and they're really good. They're good. And so I think that I think China does have a will to try and improve the relationship with Mexico, but they were thrown together due to the trade war. And instead of just letting random market trends shape the behavior, I would like to see a stronger public policy framework and commitment in Mexico to really strengthening, especially these small and medium-sized firms that are now getting into the auto value chain. This is everything. electronics also.
Perfect. We have two other questions. So one is, congratulations to Carol. I would like to ask, how did the tariffs imposed by the Trump administration affect trade dynamics between China and Latin America? And what role do these changes play in strengthening China's political influence in the region?
Well, I'll tell you what, I looked at those tariffs, and that was president and this crazy man named Peter Navarro. Mickey's heard me rave about him before. A professor at the University of California, Irvine, down the road from me, who made his, his fame is like writing books like Death by China, the China Armageddon. And Trump loves him. And so those two just got together in the Oval Office. And what are the tariffs going to be? And I mean, everybody's laughing about this, but it's not funny, right? It's like, well, we're going to divide the deficit with, Belize. Okay, we're going to divide the deficit that the U.S. is, being hurt by in two. And then we're going to multiply it. And then we're going to do a square root. And then we're going to do something. And then here's the tariff. And it's like, what are you doing? If these tariffs are hurting the world economy in many countries, right? So the only one that got hit very bad, to my mind, was Venezuela. And Mexico, it's a huge violation. I still believe in international trade agreements. It's a huge violation of the U.S.-Mexico or U.S.-Canada-Mexico agreement. But Mexico's being hurt by these tariffs. Well, guess what? So is China. So there's all the more reason for the China-Mexico trade link to improve and increase, all right? Now, the rest of the region is kind of hiding, they didn't get hit very badly. And, my thinking is that they just haven't gotten to the region, because they're focusing on the European Union and Japan and Korea. They haven't been, so Latin America's gotten, a bit of a break right now, but we don't know what's coming, right? But I just encourage Mexico so much to take advantage of this opportunity. I mean, the U.S. is blocking your entry into many markets, the markets where you're competitive, cement. Mexican cement is the most competitive in the world. Cemex has companies here. So, just take advantage of the opportunity to trade more with the European Union, with China, with the region. And really take, there's nothing else to do but find your own way. And it's got to, your way around the United States, quite frankly.
And we have a third question from Victor Kerber. We take for granted that the Monroe Doctrine is already buried and that such policy is no longer part of the U.S. foreign policy. But don't you feel that we might be entering into a reloaded version of the Monroe Doctrine with the Trump administration, especially if China gets too much involved in Latin American affairs?
Well, the first Secretary of State, this guy Tillerson, under the first Trump term, he had been the head of Exxon or something. I mean, he knew nothing about diplomacy or foreign affairs. So he goes to Mexico and he declares the Monroe Doctrine as buoyant as ever. I honestly not sure he knew what it was, to be honest. We have like the head of the armed forces that just said, June 6th is the anniversary of the invasion, the Pearl Harbor invasion. No, it's December 7th. So these people, I mean, it's like anything goes. It's, so, I think, I think that the U.S. is not going to be able to stop a deepening of relations between China and Latin America. But what bothers them, though, is that, BYD is going to have the production plant in Hermosillo. We're going to invade. So don't do the production plant. Wait, right? I mean, BYD is still exporting a lot of cars to Mexico and the rest of the region and selling them in storefronts all over the place. Greeley, Great Wall. So I think that you've just got to try and work around it. And one way to work around it, like, I don't think the US even has any idea of the diplomatic depth and richness of China's overtures to Latin America. I mean, okay, the strategic partnerships could be like diplomatic fluff, but they're written down. I mean, they're referred to by both sides. I mean, it's a start. It's a way to, you know, kind of, if you will, set the stage for interaction. It's an effort, and it's a goodwill effort. So yes, I think that China is being very careful, though. They're not going to build a lot more factories and whatnot that the Trump people could point to and then raise tariffs again.
I think Marta has another question, no?
Yes. Congratulations, Dr. Carol Weiss. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And my question is, from your point of view, can Latin America maintain balanced position between China and United States? I don't know, 10 or 20 years.
From now? Can Latin America help balance the relationship between China and the US? So right now, the US thinks that, you know, China and Latin America are just a bunch of losers. I'm serious. I mean, so I don't know. I mean, they just disregard everybody. They just, you know, so I would hope, but I think it's going to be the other way. And that is, I think it's going to be China and Latin America balancing together against the US. All right. If I don't know if that answers your question, but the US, I'm not seeing a lot of goodwill, a lot of recognition that there's, you know, a lot of other countries in the world and 35 states in Latin America. It's all, you know, this kind of very, geocentric, ethnocentric, attitude.
And we have a question from Marcela Lopez Vallejo.
Marcela, hi, how are you?
And she says, congratulations and a big applause to Carol Weiss. A quick question. Is there a differentiated relation from states in the United States to China's presence in Latin America?
Okay, California, my state, is the major trading state with the world. I mean, if we could just be our own country, we're like the 4th or 5th largest economy in the world, all right? So states that are trading states that have, I mean, other trading states would be Washington State up north, New York, some of the Pennsylvania. So states that are, that have really modern structures of management and, if you will, a global view and a global position in the United States, have deep ties in trade with China, very deep ties. And, that hasn't been brought out much because, nobody wants to draw attention to any of the strengths with regard to China because the administration will just come over and, slap more tariffs and, make it quite difficult. But there are a number of states in the West and in the Northeast that have very good relations with China. Yes. But again, they're not advertising it now because nobody in Latin America, nobody in Europe or Asia wants to draw attention to anything that could lead to more tariffs and more punishments, right? This is going to end. I promise all of you, this will not prevail. It is really, it's really surreal. It's very surreal, and it can't prevail. It just can't because the damage to the world economy is profound already, right?
I think those are all the questions. So thanks again, Carol, for this wonderful presentation and for enlightening enlightening us with this view about the triangular relations between China, the United States, and Latin America. What can we expect?
Well, I love being here. I love the university. Marcella, I worked with Marcella when she's getting her PhD at UDLA. And of course, Mickey's been my doctoral student for 3 years. So deep ties with the university. And I so appreciated being in your speaker series and in being able to engage. What we're talking about is really important. And I really appreciate the opportunity to really interact with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carol. It was very interesting, the conference. I think it is a critical perspective, a neutral position, because I think in this time that is very hard, all the news that we are listening about.
Yes.
But I think I would experience to contribute significantly in this area of the knowledge. I'm going to give you, let me put this constants that we are going.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I love those.
Yes,
nice.
It's a this is a certificate for your participation. Thank you, Carol Weiss, for her outstanding participation with the presentation China-Latin American Relation, Politics with China's Characteristics. In this lecture series, Liberalism and Protectionism, Two Sides of the Relation in Asia-Pacific, organized by International Relations Commission of the Mexican Consortium, APEC.
Thank you. Could I make one final statement? Right now in the state of California, Mexicans, whether they're documented or not documented, are the backbone of especially our construction and our agricultural industries and services, all kinds of services. And I want you to know that it is not widely held. People do not support these policies against your people. We don't support them. And the status, legal or not legal, that could be worked out in so many other constructive ways. But it's also very painful to watch what's going on right now. We don't endorse it. You only hear from these people. I hope you're not watching Fox News, but it's all negative. Well, there is so much sympathy and support and, really a lot of commitment to protecting these people. So let me end by saying I'm deeply, deeply sorry about the situation right now. And it's going to change. It has to change.
We hope that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Doctor Ernesto Turner, unas palabras de despedida ya a la mesa.
Yes. Very interesting. This position, this neutral position, and you presenting your speech. I think that United States must look more for friends than for enemies.
Yeah, that's right.
United States must not go to the Ukraine, to the Arab countries to receive bullets.
Yeah.
And to look Mexican in United States or in Mexico and give them employees, give them salaries, give them knowledge, and in that way will be the United States will have many friend countries. More power is better for peace than war. And,
estoy completamente de acuerdo. Estamos viviendo un momento muy triste. Estoy flojera, hablo español, pero
muy bien.
Estoy completamente de acuerdo. Sí, no, ese es un momento muy, muy malo, ¿no? Y tenemos que salir. No solamente la gente en los Estados Unidos, pero todo el mundo que está sufriendo por todos las gestiones agresivas.
Sí. Entonces, si saca a los mexicanos de Estados Unidos, pues que mete inversiones en México
Sí,
y aquí que los emplee en México,
sí.
¿verdad? Y de esa
Yes,
manera,
verdad, sí.
reduce las importaciones de China, aumenta las exportaciones de México, la balanza de pagos se mejora. O sea, no, bueno, la política más ventajosa es invertir en donde las inversiones producen más y bueno, no hablamos solo de dinero, sino amistad, diplomacia, friendship.
Claro, ese es claro, pero ese es un argumento racional. Tiene razón, pero el problema es que la política ahora, en este momento, en los Estados Unidos, está de otro mundo. Nosotros justamente no sabemos dónde vienen esas políticas. Y políticas tacaños, agresivos, hostiles, ¿no? Okay, I love you.
En su speech, ¿verdad? Este fondo, ese trasfondo de la conferencia muy humano, ¿verdad? Y con otro punto de vista totalmente.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And we'll meet again. Thank you, Mickey. Yes. Always. Bye. Bye.
Antes de despedirnos, nada más quiero presentar la de la siguiente semana. Permítanme un segundo, que vamos a tener, we're going to continue with the next conference, para la siguiente semana. Liberalismo y proteccionismo, diferencias entre China y Estados Unidos.
Muy bien.
A cargo del doctor Aníbal Carlos Otele, de la Universidad de Veracruz, ¿no? Entonces, los esperamos la próxima semana y pues va a ser un gusto tenerlos aquí a todos otra vez en estos webinars que estamos haciendo cada 8 días. Muchas gracias a todos. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Carol Weiss. It was an excellent conference. It was a pleasure to stay with us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. Miguel y Harold, nos vemos. Hasta luego.
Bye.